Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is David Kyle Foster, and I'm your host for today's program. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Jennifer Thorne, and her story is one of a growing same-sex attraction that stems back to childhood. And we want to look at some of those elements in childhood that she believes contributed. Not everybody who has the elements she had will end up with same-sex attraction because there's a whole bunch of converging factors and the personality of the person, the experience of the person. There's a lot that has to converge really for a broken situation to turn into same-sex attraction. So I don't want you all fearing that, you're going to have that because you have some of her problems. That's just not necessarily the case at all.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, hey, how you doing?
Hi, good. Thanks for having me, David. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and your viewing audience today.
Well, I wanted to start with going through some of your earliest years and the beginnings as you've been able to piece it out. Probably the Holy Spirit has shown you. How did it develop in its very rudimentary stages?
That's a good question. And I think, as I've journeyed with the Lord, I have gained a lot of insight into the factors that were causal. Some of them, and I think the real root issue, I did not have memory for, but I am aware of because of conversations with my mom.
Yeah.
And I can give you more detail to that. But prior to that, the things that I remembered growing up, I remember in my family of origin that mirroring and modeling after my dad was the most important thing to me, that made the most sense to me.
Why did you do that?
I think because as I watched my mom and dad interact in their relationship, I didn't like my mom's role in what I perceived to be a place of being the object of my father's lust. That was unsafe to me. Not that my dad did inappropriate things to my mom in front of us. He didn't, but just their relationship and the way that they engaged with one another made me view my mom as, I really don't like what she represents. I like more what my dad represents. And so for me growing up, I tried to be a part of and mimic my dad's life in every way possible. So I used to watch my dad shave every morning if I could, just watching him pull the razor, everything about what he did to prep himself to go to work was important to me. And I was interested in it. Even trying to model how he went to the restroom. I tried to copy that as well. It's a little difficult as a little girl, but I did the best I could because to me it meant something of value, something of strength versus the object of someone else's, something that I didn't want to participate in.
So you became like a tomboy, just to
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad taught me how to play ball. I have a lot of athletic ability in my body, was good with sports, played with the little boys, never played with the little girls.
And your parents were otherwise healthy. In other words, there wasn't any abuse or anything untoward going on in the family?
No, there was abuse in our family. There was a lot of neglect. My mom, I don't think was mature when she started raising us children and had a lot of relational deficit. And so we really were not raised by my parents. We just lived in the same house.
Really?
But in terms of having our needs met, we kind of were on our own. And I have lots of memories of me being a little girl under the age of 7, going and getting my needs met at neighbors' houses, not because I was invited or because it was set up by my parents, just because I was at their door looking unkept and needy.
Do you think there was something, you say your mom was not yet emotionally mature. Do you think that kept you from bonding with her and therefore identifying with the feminine or anything like that?
Well, I think, let me bring in the one event that I only know about, that I have no memory of. When I was 6 months old, and then my older sister was 2 years older than I was. So she was 2 something and I was 6 months old. My mom was pregnant with her third child and was sick and unable to care for us. And so she had to go on bed rest, and she sent us away to different family members for 3 months. So from the age of 6 months to 9 months, I was not with my mom and my dad, but in some foreign land. And I don't, like I say, remember it, but my mom always told the story. When I came home from that time period, my mom says I would no longer go to her. I only would go to my dad. So whatever happened to me.
She actually said that?
Yeah.
And did she give you a reason?
No, she didn't know why. She just knew that when I left, I was 6 months old and I was hers. And when I came back, I wanted nothing to do with her. Only I wanted my dad.
Perhaps a sense of rejection set in?
I'm sure that, well, as I journeyed with the Lord, the thing that the Lord showed me was that it was a fear of abandonment. I felt abandoned by my mom. She wasn't safe. I saw my mom and dad's relationship. I didn't like the role she portrayed. It wasn't safe to me. So everything in my upbringing said, it's a whole lot safer to be like your dad than like your mom. And so that became my life. In fact, even today at this age, if my sisters and I get together, we laugh all the time because I'm so much like my father that I'll do something in our mutual presence and everybody will go, oh my gosh, it's so dad, because I just am him.
Yeah. So you hung out with the boys and you're exposed to inappropriate things. What sort of was going on? And then finally sexually abused at around early teens, right?
Well, yeah, kind of lots of sexual abuse. So I played with all the little boys in the neighborhood, not any of the little girls, and nor was I interested because I was similar in skill and desire and competition and all of that. So I played with the little boys, but we were always unsupervised, and that always led to very compromising situations. I'd be the only girl in the group, and things would happen, and I would not have control to be able to stop them. So I might even have been a willing participant in the banter and all of that stuff that would lead to inappropriate touching and circumstances. But it would always reach a point where I would be very uncomfortable and then unable to stop anything from happening. So that went on regularly, growing up at every stage. And then when we moved to our second house, so now I'm like 10, 11, 12, similar things happened, but of course they went farther, of boys putting me in inappropriate situations and wanting to do things to me that I did not want, but also could not stop. So the degree of the inappropriate things stepped up. And then we moved again to Wisconsin. Then I spent a summer or two on a relative's farm. And that led to sexual abuse with that relative, which was impactful.
Considering the scenario that you were in, did you begin to blame yourself for the abuse because of your halfway situation with the boys?
I didn't actually ever feel like it was my fault. I always felt like a willing participant. So even in the case with my relative that sexually abused me over a period of time, I felt like a peer, not like a child, if that makes sense.
Now, let's jump ahead. You went to your first gay bar. Talk about how that even happened and what you experienced there.
So my my same-sex attractions, while I experienced them, I didn't call myself gay. I didn't even know what to do with them other than that I experienced them. And so now I'm in college. I'm in a DeVry Institute of Technology in Chicago. My family is having a family reunion that I end up going to, and I have an older cousin, male, who was a gay man, and he was out and the family knew about it. And it wasn't openly discussed, but everybody knew. Anyway, so we were at this family reunion, and he's like, well, do you want to go do something fun? Because this is kind of a drag. And I said, sure. So we went into Indianapolis and went to the movies. Then after that, he's like, well, do you want to go to a bar? And I'm like, sure, because drinking was a favorite of mine. So he brought me to one of his favorite bars, which was a gay bar. And so when I stepped into that place, that's the first time in my life where I actually felt like, hey, I belong here. These are like my people, even though it was a male bar. There wasn't very many females in it. I still felt like, okay, yeah, I get this place. This is comfortable to me. I belong here, and I like this place, and I like what goes on. So
now, what was your relationship with God prior to this moment? I mean, did you have any sense of guilt over what you had been doing with the boys? Did you talk to him? Did you ask him to help you? What was that relationship like?
So for me, I lived in my head. So thinking and reason and logic were the places that I resided with it, along with learning practical and tangible things. So playing sports and all that kind of stuff, building things, doing things with my hands. That's how I took in information and understood the world. So for me, God had no place in that. I wasn't naturally spiritual. I was very natural in my biology. And so as I was growing up, because of circumstances in my family's life, I had to go to a Catholic school for a couple of years, I think for second and third grade, or third and fourth grade, something like that. And that was a very negative experience. The nuns were very mean. I had lots of questions. And basically they said, shut up, sit down, and do what you're told. Now, that was a unique experience for me, because in my family of origin, there was no order, there was no authority, there was just chaos. So then you stick me in a Catholic school and everything was structured and ordered and total authoritarian. I couldn't cope with it.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's like, okay, well, if this is what God is supposed to be, you can have it. I have no interest in this. Yeah. So I made an intellectual decision that said, God, you're out. You have no worth or value for me. You can't even answer questions. So you're not a very big God. I'll figure out life out on my own. So I didn't have any guilt or remorse or anything. I was surviving.
Now, you ended up in San Francisco after the gay bar experience. What was that like? I can imagine.
Well, it was interesting because I had boyfriends up until this point, but by this time in my life, my attractions to women that had come forward so far, especially with exposure to that gay bar, that I knew I just had to figure out this aspect of my life that I had no experience with at all. And by this time in society, it was known that San Francisco was the gay capital of the United States. Right. So I knew moving into the Bay Area that I could figure this piece of life out. It would be easy. And so I did move there in 81 and very quickly got connected to the lesbian gay community and jumped in through sports and then the bars and then the pride parades and all of that. And then I was in, you know.
You know, I never liked the gay bars. They had this atmosphere, a demonic feel to them with that boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, kind of a beat. Just every song had this driving
Right.
beat to it. To this day, I mean, this was back 70s for me, but to this day, they
Yeah.
use that same driving beat in a lot of their music. And I just didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
So that was my experience of a couple times I went to gay bars.
Yeah, well, I lived in the bar life. I mean, the way I grew up, even prior to jumping into the gay lifestyle, I loved the bar scene because I could drink, and drink could help me cover my fear of rejection, which I lived in. Now, that's one of the things that the Lord did address after I came to him and committed my life to him. So, but prior to that, I couldn't relax without alcohol because I had this continual fear of rejection in me that just
Yeah.
drove me crazy.
Yeah. So then you met Sally.
Yeah, as I journeyed forward, and had several relationships, several sexual encounters, several start-stop things, met this woman. We developed a friendship first. She struggled with same-sex attraction, but did not describe herself as a lesbian, didn't really want to be a lesbian. She just wanted to be happy and content. And she was very athletic. So we had a lot of similarities in our backgrounds. And we actually started playing racquetball together and developed a friendship over that. And she would engage with me inappropriately to a degree. But the biggest factor that kept us from actually being involved in a relationship is that I wasn't a believer and she was. And she couldn't cross over that moral boundary. But God was already working in my life through her and through some other means. But he was revealing himself to me, and I was beginning to hear him, and I was beginning to respond to that. And I didn't know what it was. And I could actually see the relationship that she had with the Lord, and that it was real, and that it did produce something in her life that was desirable to me. I wanted whatever that was. I didn't know that that was an effect of her being in relationship with the Lord, even though she struggled. What she had with the Lord was real. I just didn't understand what it was. And through a set of circumstances, I went home for a couple of weeks, and I was miserable because she wouldn't go all in with me. And that's what I wanted. I was totally enmeshed with her already, emotionally, spiritually. I wanted to be physically. She just wouldn't go all that far with me. So I was really in a bad place because I couldn't have what I wanted, and there she was. So when I went home, there was another woman I was also involved with, and her parents were believers, and God was speaking to me through them. They knew I was leaving, and the dad of that family gave me 2 books for the plane ride home. One I didn't read till later, but one I did read, and it was Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth. And that opened the door for me that God could possibly be something I should pay attention to again.
Yeah.
Then I spent a week actually on the couch at home, drinking and eating in my depression. And then another week back at that same family where I had met my gay cousin, and he took me to a gay bar. And everyone in the family was home. They were all believers. And I was able to ask lots of life questions. I wasn't pursuing God at this point. I was pursuing life answers, but they were giving me all godly responses, and they weren't rejecting me, even though I was gruff and somewhat angry and accusatory. But they all knew me because I had relationship with them over the years. You know, now I'm in my mid-20s. And anyway, I asked lots of questions and interactions. Well, one night, I was already in bed, and their oldest daughter, my uncle's oldest daughter, comes upstairs to challenge me about something. And she does. And she also leaves me another book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell.
I remember that one.
Yeah. And so I don't even remember what she challenged me about, but the challenge was what God used to hook me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to pick up that book just to show her. I mean, who does she think she is?
Mm.
Here I am, educated, professional, working, whatever. So I pick up that book and I only read into about 120 pages. You cannot deny the logical evidence for God and for Christ and maintain any kind of reason and logic within yourself with integrity.
Right.
So God removed my stiff arm from him. Well, that created a problem, and I can't have a problem because I live in logic and reason. So I turned to the back of the book and read how to become a Christian. And I prayed an intellectual prayer on New Year's Eve, 1984, because I couldn't deny God or Christ.
Mm.
But I prayed with the motive to go back to California and show this woman that I was a believer and that we could be gay and Christian and together. And so I went back, and that's exactly what happened.
So had you read the scriptures in Romans and Leviticus and First Timothy about homosexuality being sinful?
No, never,
Okay.
never got a, I had no religious background at all.
Okay.
I didn't even know Daniel in the lion's den or Shadrach, Meshach. Never heard any of those stories, never saw things as cartoons, never had playbooks or anything. In fact, the only time when I was a little bit older, 7 or 8, that I was brought to someone's church, it scared the living daylights out of me.
Yeah, me too.
It was so foreign to anything I'd ever been exposed to.
Yeah.
So I had nothing.
So now you had Jesus on the rudimentary level. You had said the sinner's prayer, or whatever. It was intellectual instead of full on, with your emotions engaged. Yet you still felt unlovable and rejected, didn't you?
Well, I did, sure, of course. I mean, all I did was give God permission to move, but I really did not know who I was striking a deal with. And I don't think, if you look at scripture now today, like we can read in Genesis the story of Abraham and God, and in the beginning, how he makes a covenant with Abraham and how he walks through the cut pieces of animals. I don't think Abraham had a clue of the God he was engaging with. And we see that as Abraham does silly things like, hey, yeah, Sarah, she's my sister. She's not my wife. And she does that not once, but twice. So we give God permission, and then he begins to demonstrate exactly who he is and how much he loves us, and how intimately he knows us.
Yeah.
And so for the 2 years that we were together, God began to show me by personal engagement who he was and exactly what he could do to change my life. And I didn't ask him to do this.
Give us an example of one incident where he did something like that.
Yeah. So in the first year that I was with this woman and we were living together, everything, money, furniture, household, everything. The thing that he spoke to me supernaturally is that I was created wonderfully, fearfully, and that there was nothing that he made me that was a burden or something to be rejected, but to celebrate everything, including my femininity, which I had specifically, purposefully rejected because to me, it meant I was unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
So in my desire to keep myself safe, I rejected that aspect of my femininity or of my womanhood out of safety. Mm. And the Lord showed me, this is an integral part of who I've made you. You are a woman and you are feminine, and you need to receive rather than reject that aspect of who he made me to be. And so I did. I took him at his word and I received. And as soon as I received that aspect, there is a level of peace that I gained because I wasn't struggling and fighting against every waking moment that I was made a woman in his image.
Now, the sexual abuse, what questions did you have of him as to why he allowed it? And how did he turn that one around? Because that's a biggie.
Well, I didn't have any questions about why he allowed it. That didn't enter in because I was on my own. I didn't blame God for anything that I experienced. It's just what I knew, and I survived in it. So I didn't blame God for any of that. In fact, I didn't even ask him to address any of my brokenness. I didn't even know that he could. So after in that first year, after he showed me that I was lovable as created, and I stopped wrestling with that, the next thing he showed me right away is that I lived under a fear of rejection. Now, I couldn't even see that I did that. I couldn't see it because it's all I ever knew. I learned it from my mother. It's a generational curse that's gone on in my family. I could see it in my mom and her sisters and their parents. I could see it in my siblings. I can see it in their children. But I couldn't see it then in my life. And so he showed me that I had it, and then he removed it. And then he told me to walk differently. And I'm like, excuse me, I don't know how to do that. He said, yes, you do. The woman that you're with knows how to do that really well. Just copy her. I'm like, oh, that's too extreme. She was like one end of the spectrum. I was the other. He said, you can figure it out. Pick one thing. And so for the whole second year, he kept tapping me on the shoulder saying, okay, now be different. And I was in a circumstance in my life where it made it really easy for the Lord to give me an opportunity to practice gaining really relational skills that I didn't learn growing up, in part because of my family of origin and in part because of my fear of rejection. So, and it's not that I couldn't communicate. I could. If you had something, David, that I needed, I could come to you. I could clearly communicate. I could get what I needed, and I could go away. What I couldn't do is go out for coffee. I didn't know how to do that. And that was a relational thing.
Yeah. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left. What other experiences with the Lord, healing experiences, transformative experiences, have you had with him that you haven't mentioned yet?
Well, for the Lord to show me the fear of abandonment that I experienced as the baby of 6 months old, that was a 2-year journey that the Lord took me through. And while he took me through that, that was the most difficult period I ever experienced in my life, because when he opened that up, and I wasn't aware that that was living inside of me, he peeled that open. He showed me that. And when he did that, that made me more vulnerable to being attracted to the same sex than I ever experienced in my whole life. And there was a component of that attraction that was supernatural, beyond my control. So I was really like hanging off a cliff for almost 2 years. That journey took start to finish to get through. And at the end of it, the clarity and the renouncing of the vow that I was abandoned, which was a lie, I was not, that ended it. And that was just, I mean, that's a whole podcast in itself, but
well, what would you tell a young girl who's feeling same-sex attractions and maybe is starting to head in that direction? What would you tell her?
To cultivate your relationship with the Lord. That is, I mean, he is really the only one that knows what the journey is going to entail to move a person beyond those kinds of attractions that he never intended for people to have in that manner. And what I've experienced in life is that typically underneath a wrong attraction is a real God need that we've learned to meet inappropriately.
Exactly.
And so it's a very difficult thing to learn to feel the need and allow God to pull all of that other stuff off of it so that you can gain the appropriate style of relating for that need to be met in a godly way.
And for the girl, this will be the last question, but for the girl who's been in the lifestyle, maybe angry at God, doesn't want to give it up, yet something in her is telling her there's something more. What would you say to her?
Just be honest with the Lord. I mean, if you can be transparent and confessional before the Lord, he'll honor that and he'll help you through it. I don't care what the issue is. I don't care how angry you are. It doesn't matter. If you can be transparent and confessional, you will experience transformation in your life with the Lord if you're willing to continue to walk with him.
Yeah. One of the things I like to say, if you're at the point where you're willing to do what it takes, then God's going to move with great power and swiftness, even in many cases. Well, Jennifer, I'm so glad we had you on the program today. Is there any way that people can follow up with you, or do you have any writings or videos or anything?
I've done actually several videos with similar to this with other organizations that also help in this arena. So the Restored Hope Network, you can find me on their resources map. If you click Montana, my name will come up there. I have
What's the name of your ministry?
Well, it's just, I'm a pastoral affiliate, so I don't have a ministry in Montana. It's really hard to, we only have a million people in a state that's almost as big as California. So it's really hard to get more than a couple of people together across the state. So I minister mostly electronically, but I'm a part of most of the Facebook pages that help people deal with this issue, whether it's yourself or a loved one, a daughter or child or whatever.
And you have a YouTube page, right?
I do have a couple of YouTube things up there, but I'm not a podcaster. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm just a girl who's raised 5 children, and I've got 1 more to go, and I minister to anybody's heart that desires to do this. And
great.
That's where I'm at.
That's what God's looking for.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being with us. And I just want to say to the audience, if you're struggling with same-sex attractions, Jennifer's story is multiplied, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands probably could tell you what Jesus has done to reverse their descent into the homosexual lifestyle, and even bring healing to many of the issues, the broken issues that have driven you in that direction. I remember in my experience, when God began to heal me one by one of the major root issues, the idea of going back to that lifestyle became ludicrous to me. Because when you compare it to the God of the universe, who's full of glory and who is love itself, there's no contest. So I want to encourage you today to seek out the Lord and ask him to help you through his Son, Jesus Christ, and by the power of the Holy Spirit. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.